Today, we are talking about one of the biggest safety issues in Maine, domestic violence. And we are here with a survivor, Cece. Thank you so much for being here. And Francine Garland-Stark with Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence. Really appreciate both of you being here. And of course, Cece, to you sharing your story. It's a hard thing to do. And so, to the point where you are comfortable, can you share a little bit about your experience?
Yes, sure, Adrienne. I am a survivor of domestic violence. I have had multiple abusers in my life. So I was married for a very long time, and during that time, there was a lot of daily abuse and trauma that I endured over the course of years. And that was not physical trauma, but it was psychological trauma that happened to me. And so I've been
You're on the path to recovery.
Yes.
But it's a long one.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, in about 2.5 years ago, I finally walked out for the last time and started to walk the path that is long and hard of gaining back my personal power and control in my life. I was pretty much broken into a million pieces. I was looking to figure out how to pick those all back up again. And at the time, I ended up in a crisis stabilization unit within a few months after leaving my abuser. I needed help. I was broken physically, mentally, and financially, to be honest. And through the crisis stabilization unit, I was put in touch with, through these doors, one of the Maine's domestic violence resource centers here. They are based in Portland, and they worked with me over the next few weeks trying to find me housing, shelter, a safe house. When there was not enough room in the shelters in Portland, they did not give up on me. They started reaching out to the other organizations, domestic violence resource centers in Maine, and eventually got me in touch with Safe Voices in Androscoggin County, who they have a shelter up there, and they also have a safe house as well. So I was able to secure a room there. I lived there for about 9 months, and while I was there, I worked with the advocates to pick up those pieces and start putting them back together. Getting jobs, getting a vehicle, and eventually finding housing, which put me in York County. And so from there, they transferred me into the care of Caring Unlimited, their domestic violence resource center. And so now the advocates there sort of assist me and provide me support with these next steps in the journey from fleeing my abuser. So there's a lot more independence, but still, I need that support and
What I'm hearing, though, Francine, to you too, is this is a very long process. It can look very different to anybody who has been through it. So let's talk about, first of all, the different types of domestic abuse that you tend to see when it comes to the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence.
Well, domestic abuse and violence really is a pattern of coercive controlling behavior. And that behavior can be everything from really putting a person in isolation, making them doubt their own interpretation of events. It can be keeping people from having access to money, making threats, doing intimidation, stalking is a very common part of the experience, as well as the sexual violence and physical violence that is what people think of first. But really, it's this ongoing coercive behavior that really does serve to trap a person in this circumstance and really doubt their interpretation of reality. It's insidious.
And it's, the majority of people that you help are women, but the reality is it's both men and women who can experience this type of abuse.
People of all genders can be abusive to people of all genders. And so our services are available to everyone who's been affected by abuse and violence.
Let's talk about some of those services. I know the advocates were crucial in your process, which you are still in the middle of, it sounds like. But tell us a little bit about these advocates, because one thing that you shared right before we got started was that you take 135 calls per day on the helpline. Let's think about that. 135 per day just in Maine on this helpline. So what is that process like when you pick up the phone and you dial that number? Then what? What happens?
I like to think about that first call to the helpline as something of a sacred act, because you're calling this number and hoping the person on the other end is not going to judge you and is going to do something helpful, and you have no idea. And so advocates are trained to listen deeply, to make no assumptions about a person, but to really create a space and conversation where they can tell you what's been going on, what they've tried to be safe, where they're hoping that they can be, and then the advocate can help put together what the person is hoping for and the kinds of risks that they're facing, and see if there's a way to make a plan. We like to call it a safety plan, where there are steps the person can take in order to get closer to that goal of being able to be independent, and as Cece said, really just taking back their own power and control over their own lives.
Do you remember making that first call, and what was that like for you?
You know what? To be honest, I don't remember making the first call. I was trying to rack my brain as we've been standing here today, which probably just goes to show exactly the level of trauma that I was in at that time. I do have a lot of recollections of making phone calls while I was still living with my abuser. But I do remember them I remember feeling hope. I remember feeling strength. And I remember feeling a little less scared.
You were heard.
Yeah. And I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone.
And you've seen the need for these services really increase since the pandemic, which we often think, the pandemic was years ago, but that trend you're seeing is still happening today. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, it's been I've been doing this work for several decades in the state, and there's been a steady increase in the number of people being served, to where now we hear from at least 12,000 people in the state of Maine who are experiencing domestic abuse and violence in a year. That is a lot of people. And part of what is so hard is that there are so many factors that affect a person's ability to have a sense of hope and that there is a pathway out, because people need to have access to housing, transportation, and they need to be able to feed themselves and their children. They need to be able to feel right about what they're doing in a community that can be very judgmental about what people are making for choices. And so the helpline is this sort of resource to be able to have someone who's going to talk with you, to problem solve all of that, and be there for you, to hear you deeply, to hear you. And I think that is an extraordinary and very low barrier service that we make available across the state. And the advocates who do it are extraordinary people.
If anybody's watching and sees themselves in you, what would you say to encourage them to make that call?
I would say that it is scary, but do it. I mean, even if you don't have an immediate plan or thought of leaving, just speaking with an advocate on the phone who knows what you're going through, who knows how to talk to you the way that feels safe, because that's something that sort of happens sometimes with family and friends. They may have well-meaning intentions or words, but they're not trained to use the language that is so important, especially in the beginnings, when you're fleeing abuse. That's where the advocates really come in. So I would say make the call, start that first step. Everything seems overwhelming when you're in it, but the advocates can show you how to take it one step at a time, and they will guide you through that process, and that you can do it. You can.
Yeah, awesome. And of course, Francine, the thing is what you're experiencing is the funding to some of these services is in jeopardy. Can you tell us how and what's going on with that?
Over the years, the domestic violence resource centers across the state and the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence have worked hard to compete for grants, and there's a contract with the state of Maine where there are federal funds together with a fairly small amount of state funds. And right now, all of those federal funds are in jeopardy, and in particular, the ones that come through the Department of Justice, some of which we compete for by having to apply every couple or 3 years. That whole website for applying has been locked down since the beginning of February, and there's no news about when or if that's going to reopen for people to be able to renew any of these grants. So statewide, we're looking at a reduction of at least $2 million as of the end of September. And that translates into at least 20 advocates statewide who will be laid off. I mean, we're talking about, this is work that is primarily about paying for people to be there. And we just can't sustain the same level of service with fewer people and an ongoing increasing demand.
So what is your hope? When you hear this, Cece, what is your hope? Just knowing that the funding is in jeopardy at this point.
My hope is that legislatures listen and that they hear our voices, that they see our faces, that they remember our stories, because if we don't have the money for these resources, these are life-saving funds that we need.
Francine, if anybody wants more information, whether it's they need help of their own or they want to get involved in some way, because I know you also take volunteers. Volunteers are an important part of what you do. But if somebody wants to get involved or they need more information, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
The Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence website is a great first step, because you can go there, you'll see the 24/7 helpline number right away, and there are 3 important buttons. One that says Get Help, and if you click there, it will show you the map of Maine and all of the regional centers and some additional resources on that map, and you can reach out to those helplines directly. You can also click on the button that says Be Informed, and you can access information to really educate yourself about understanding more about these issues. And finally, you can press the button that says Donate, and you can really bring your own resources to bear on helping sustain these critical resources for everyone who needs them.
Francine, Cece, thank you so much. Really appreciate your bravery. That's a tough thing to do, and so thank you for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Of course, we'll mention as well, we have more information on WGME.com.